The shocking breakup. She cheated after a year together. It was truly unimaginable. It was completely unexpected. My girlfriend of 1 year cheated on me. I never predicted what would happen next. This story takes place over the course of several years. So it's a bit long, please be patient with me. So before I go into this story, I need to lay out some history in order to create some context. Pretty much my entire life I have suffered from bad depression and social anxiety. I am now 38, but when I was 30 I got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. For those of you who don't know what that is, it is a personality disorder that results in someone having a very hard time regulating their emotions. It's believed to have stemmed from some form of childhood trauma or abandonment. It usually results in impulsive behavior, emotional outbursts, a lack of self-identity and a pattern of unhealthy and unstable relationships, be it friends or romantic relationships. For those of you who do know what it is, please don't villainize it. I can guarantee you that whoever you knew that had it has been struggling emotionally far longer than you know. And also more than likely severely regrets whatever they did in order to ruin the relationship. They more than likely have not reached out to mend things because of embarrassment or a fear of rejection. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, on to the story. So I met Sarah roughly 4 years ago. My friend Ali, who I had not talked to in several years, had reached out and wanted to check in on me. I was surprised since I was just under the assumption they were tired of my mood swings and decided to cut me out of their lives for good. She wanted to know how I was doing and if I wanted to come to a party they were having at their place this weekend. We talked for a bit and I let her know things had been a bit rough. At this point my depression was so bad that I never did anything except go to work and come home. I did not talk to anyone or hang out with anyone. I was all alone. So at the urging of my therapist, I accepted the invitation. That weekend Ali's husband James came and picked me up and took me back to their place. The party had not started yet, but there were a few familiar faces, and there was definitely one I had never seen before. It was Sarah. Now right off the bat I was very intimidated by her, because she was absolutely gorgeous. I mean in my head she was miles out of my league. Everyone I knew was happy to see me and they all gave me hugs. It felt good, but awkward. I was introduced to Sarah. She was a friend of someone I knew and it was actually her first time at Ali and James' house. She looked at me, smiled and said hi. I said hi back but then quickly looked away. I was too nervous. After a little while more people showed up and the party was underway. Now everyone I knew drank, and to excess. But I had quit drinking years before. So being basically the only sober person at the party was, well, weird and a bit uncomfortable. See, I'm not a fan of small, cramped and loud spaces. And that's what the inside of their house felt like. So after a while, when I was feeling overwhelmed, I stepped outside and sat at a table in their backyard. After about 10 minutes or so of trying to decompress, I heard the door open and then close. I turned to see who it was and it was Sarah. She walked up to the table and asked if she could join me. I was super nervous and sadly, a bit skeptical. My past relationships, platonic and romantic, had left me constantly on edge and a bit mistrusting. But I said it was no problem and she sat down. She asked me how I knew everyone, and I told her I have known Ali since I was 18, and I met everyone through her. But we don't talk as much these days. She asked me why, but I deflected the question. We just continued to sit there talking. The longer it went on, the more relaxed I was becoming. After what felt like 5 minutes, but was actually an hour, Ali came out to see where I'd gone and found me and Sarah talking. She asked if everything was okay and I told her it was. I just was decompressing from feeling overstimulated inside. After that, Sarah excused herself and went inside. I followed shortly after. I stayed at the party until about midnight. That was when my social meter just hit 0, and I had to head home. Everyone else was drunk, so I needed to call an Uber to take me home. I said my goodbyes to anyone who was coherent enough to understand, and I stepped out front to wait for my ride. I didn't even notice, but Sarah came up from behind and sat down next to me. She asked what I was doing, so I told her. I commented on how she didn't seem as drunk as everyone else. She explained that while she did drink, she wasn't a real heavy drinker. This immediately appealed to me. We kept talking until my Uber showed up. I told her to have a good night and went home. The next day I was off work, just sitting at home drinking my coffee when I got a text. Which was weird because I never got texts. And what was weirder was that it was a number I didn't know. Turns out it was Sarah. She said she enjoyed talking to me, so she got my number from Ali. Again, I was skeptical of her. Why would she want to talk to me? I was no one interesting or special. I didn't get it. I responded and we just spent the next hour or so texting back and forth just talking about nothing. I had noticed the night before that she just seemed like someone who was really easy to talk to, and it was only proven today. So over the course of the next several weeks this became a daily thing. We would text back and forth most of the day. Eventually she asked if I wanted to go grab a coffee sometime. I reluctantly agreed. We met up at a local cafe and spent the next 2 hours just talking and laughing. It was during this conversation that my BPD got brought up. She told me that she actually had an aunt who had BPD, and she understood how difficult it is to live with. That made me feel relieved. She told me about how things had been a bit rough for her lately as well. Her apartment ended up having black mold, so she had to move out. But then she was laid off from her job. So she was staying with her mom till she got back on her feet. So Sarah and I became fast friends. Now, I have a problem where when a pretty girl shows me positive attention, I tend to overanalyze and overthink everything. And I definitely did that with Sarah. I had developed this huge crush on her, and it was probably very obvious, and between my constantly shifting emotions and the overthinking things I from time to time would have breakdowns. It had been 3 months since Sarah and I had met. And that is when my breakdowns tend to happen the most. And like clockwork, they did. I would get jealous of other guys, but keep it to myself. I would think that her and other people were only spending time with me because they had pity for me. That she was talking bad about me behind my back. One day Sarah could see that I was feeling extra emotional that day. She asked me what was wrong and I told her it was nothing. She insisted I talk about it. And after some back and forth I gave in. I told her about all the thoughts and feelings I was having. I left out the part about me having a crush on her, but other than that, I spilled my purse out on her doorstep. After I was done she kind of just sat there staring at me. It went on for what felt like forever. Then she reached out and pulled me in for a huge hug. It kind of freaked me out and tried to jump back, but she just grabbed me and pulled me in tightly. She told me that she would never do that to me and she knew that what I was feeling was not my actual feelings, but my trauma coming to the surface. Now if I didn't have a crush on this girl before, I certainly did now. Sarah and I were spending most of our time together. We had become best friends and way faster than either of us had expected. She brought me over to meet her mom, who basically became the mom I never had. My relationship with my parents was not great. I had not spoken to either of them in years. But her mom welcomed me with open arms. She always had me over for dinner and insisted that I come over for holidays and other gatherings. She treated me like a son, and I can honestly say that I loved her. Because of my time with Sarah, and the regular therapy I was attending, I was starting to notice a difference in my emotions. I was feeling a lot more stable. I didn't immediately go to negative thoughts anymore. I got more comfortable in social settings. She even invited me to meet several of her friends, and they welcomed me into their friend group right away. I was starting to feel more confident and was starting to see some value in myself, but there was still a long way to go. About 8 months into hanging out we were on a camping trip with some friends. It was dark and we were sitting around the fire. Sarah and I, since we had become so close, did occasionally have cute little physical contact moments, that at the time I thought they were innocent. I still thought she was out of my league, so I never tried anything. And since she never approached me, I took that as validation that she was not interested in me that way. But while we were sitting around the fire, she moved closer to me and put her head on my shoulder. It was at this moment that I knew I was in trouble. I had come to fall in love with her. I sat by the fire smiling, but was screaming in my head. What are you doing? She is your best friend. You can't be in love with her. I sat on those feelings for maybe a week or so before I decided that it was best to pack them up and throw them in mental storage. At about 11 months I was hanging out with some new friends I met through Sarah named Mark and Danielle. They had been together for nearly 10 years, but were not married and had no kids. They were really interesting people and very down to earth. They had become the people I grew closest to out of all of Sarah's friends. Danielle had been one of Sarah's oldest and closest friends. Now one night the three of us are sitting in their garage, and out of nowhere Mark looks at me and says, "You're in love with Sarah, aren't you?" Danielle looked at me smiling. I was a little shocked that they just asked me point blank. I stumbled over my words a bit, but I denied that I did. They both just stared at me with looks that said they weren't buying it. I denied it again, but they just kept staring. Finally I sighed and said, "Is it that obvious?" They said, "Only when you look at her." My head fell into my hands. I was so embarrassed. They asked why I hadn't asked her out yet. And I told them because I thought she was way out of my league, that we were best friends and I accepted that was as far as it would go. Danielle, again point blank, just said, "You know she is crazy about you too, right?" I didn't believe her. I said she was crazy for even thinking that. While I had become more confident in the last several months, I was still working through some things. Mark chimed in and said, "Seriously, she is really into you. You haven't noticed the way she looks at you?" I said, "Yeah, as a friend." They both groaned. They told me that I should shoot my shot, that they guaranteed that she would say yes if I asked her out. I told them I would think about it. And I did. I spent the next 2 weeks with only that on my mind. I even hung out with Sarah less those 2 weeks because I needed to sort out my thoughts and feelings. Finally, I made a decision. I was going to ask her out. Mark and Danielle were good people. Why would they lie to me? I had not seen or talked to Sarah in 4 days, which was weird for us. But I texted her and asked her if she wanted to meet up. She agreed immediately. We met up at that local cafe again. We were sitting and talking. Me with a lead ball in my throat and a million butterflies in my stomach. I couldn't stop fidgeting. I was so nervous. Obviously Sarah could see something was up and asked if there was something wrong. I didn't answer for a second, then looked at her and said that I had something on my mind. Something that had been bothering me for a couple weeks now. And I needed an answer. She looked at me strangely but asked what I needed to know. I hesitated for a moment, but then I just came out and said it. I asked her out. I have never seen a smile so big. She raised her fists and said, "Finally." I must have looked shocked, because she giggled when she looked at me and said she had been waiting for me to do that for forever. I asked her if she was so interested. Why didn't she approach me? She said that she knew that I was hesitant to date because of my BPD. So she wanted to respect that. But as time went on, she saw me becoming healthier and more stable. And it was then that she hoped I would be ready to ask her out. But I never did, so she thought I just still wasn't ready. She wanted the ball in my court so that way I could date when I actually felt ready for it. I was so confused. Not by what she said, that made sense, and I thought it was sweet. I was confused because I never in a million years would have thought she would be interested in me like that. She reached out and grabbed my hands with hers, stared right into my eyes and said that she would love to go out with me. I was still confused, but it was a happy confusion. I thought, hey, it might not make sense, but she likes me and that's what matters. So we started dating. Okay, now fast forward to a little over a year later. Sarah was still technically living with her mom, but she basically lived with me. I had started to notice that Sarah was acting a bit off recently. I first noticed because she had trouble keeping eye contact, and she never had a problem doing that. I still had problems with overthinking things, so I figured I was just being paranoid for no reason and brushed it off. But then she started to talk less, sat a bit further away on the couch. While we usually had sex about 5 times a week, that had dropped to pretty much nothing. And she just kind of had this look of guilt in her eyes. I tried bringing it up, but she said it was nothing and went back to playing Candy Crush. I could tell something was wrong. A couple days later we were in bed when I turned to her and just asked, "Are you cheating on me?" For a second her eyes got so wide, but as she turned to look at me her face contorted into an almost insulted look. She said she couldn't even believe I was asking her that. I said that I noticed her behavior lately and I could tell something was wrong. She again said it was nothing, and that I was probably overthinking things like I had a habit of doing. This got under my skin a bit. I told her to cut the shit and tell me what was going on. I told her I saw how scared she looked when I asked her, which to me was an admission of guilt. She started to stammer but she denied it again. I just got out of bed and told her this is her last chance to come clean. If she didn't then I would just end the relationship right now. She broke down and started to cry. I had expected this. She said she was so sorry. That it only happened once a couple of weeks ago. Which added up because that's when her behavior started to change. She said she didn't know why she did it. That it was a mistake and she was so sorry. I asked who it was and she said it was our friend Josh. Now I never really liked Josh. Sarah was good friends with his wife Stacy, so in order to hang out with her, we also had to with Josh. He was cocky, brash and kind of a bully. He really bothered me. So when Sarah said it was him, I was in shock. I asked her why him of all people. I told her she even hated him, so why? She couldn't give me a reason. She said she didn't know how or why it even happened. I told her she needed to leave. She had a couple minutes to get her bags packed and out of my apartment. She begged me not to do this. To just talk to her, but I said no. She lost any right to a conversation about us the moment you slept with someone else. She had nothing to say to this. So she just continued to cry and pack a couple bags. When she reached the door I told her to stop and sit on the couch. She looked confused, but she did. I told her to wait a minute. I went into my room and grabbed a decently sized box. I came out and put the box on the coffee table. Sarah obviously was wondering what the box was about, but she didn't ask. I asked her if this had anything to do with our conversation about marriage last month. See, I am not really one for marriage. My parents were divorced and I know how messy it can be. And while I'm not a pessimist, I understand that the reality is that no couple is guaranteed to stay together forever. So why get married if by chance we end up splitting up one day? Wouldn't it be easier to just break up than go through a divorce? Sarah did want to get married one day. She said she understood my position, but she loved the idea of two people enjoying a celebration to share their love with their closest friends and family. That to get married was the greatest display of two people's love. We talked for a while, just bouncing ideas and thoughts off each other. We normally had great communication. We tried our best to not get into arguments, and instead try to understand where each person was coming from, and would figure out a compromise that worked for us both. That's not to say that we didn't have our arguments. Sometimes, those just can't be avoided. So I told her that while I was not the biggest fan of marriage, I was still open to the idea and would think about it. So I asked Sarah if it had anything to do with our talk about marriage last month, and she said that could have been a contributing factor. She just felt disappointed that we didn't share the same feelings on marriage. She started to question if this was actually going to go anywhere, and it made her start to feel bad and unwanted. I told her that I was open to the idea and would think about it. So why did it seem like she took my response as a direct no? She said she didn't know. For some reason she just couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't going to change my feelings on the matter. It was at this time I slid the box over to her. She just looked at me and I told her to open it. She did, and inside was another box. Again she looked at me confused, then pulled out that box and opened it. There was another box. It was basically a nesting dolls box. Sarah had some weird love of nesting dolls. I never understood it, but it was her thing. She did this about 3 more times until she opened the last box, and inside was a jewelry box. She dropped it on the table and whipped her head around to face me, all wide-eyed and in utter disbelief. I told her that I had thought about it and came to a decision. That it didn't matter how I spent the rest of my life with her, just that I did. And if marriage was really important to her, I would step out of my comfort zone to make her happy. Tears welled up in her eyes even more. She started crying even harder now. I said, I had planned on marrying you, but you ruined that. Your doubts and lack of trust has now ruined our future together. I wanted her to feel the same hurt she made me feel. So I had decided that before she left, what better way to jab the dagger in than to show her that I had planned on giving her exactly what she wanted. I got up from the couch, went to the door, opened it and told her to get out. Still crying, she slowly got up and walked out of my apartment, defeated. I made sure to slam the door behind her and locked it. Right after she left I called Stacy and told her what Sarah and her husband had done. Stacy was pissed. She had suspected that Josh had been cheating on her for a while now. I told her then Sarah might not have been the only one then, as this just happened a couple weeks ago. She just screamed and hung up the phone. A little while later, Sarah's mom called me asking what happened. She said Sarah came home and just went straight to her room crying. And how she has just been sobbing nonstop. I told her about how Sarah had cheated on me. Her mom didn't believe me. I told her how I confronted Sarah tonight about it. It took some work, but I got her to admit to it. Her mom asked me, what about the proposal? I had made her mom aware of what I had planned on doing. She even helped me pick out the ring. I told her there was no longer a proposal. I told her that I told Sarah about the proposal, just so she knew what she lost. Her mom was upset, but definitely not with me. She said that she loves me and understands my decision. That it will be a shame to no longer see me coming over for dinner and spending time with the family. I said I would miss her too and that I loved her. I hung up and tried to go to sleep. A couple weeks later her mom called me again and said that Sarah was doing terribly. She wouldn't eat, she couldn't sleep. She just laid in bed all day crying. She had gotten fired from her job for not showing up. That her life was a mess because of what she had done, and wanted to know if I would be willing to talk to her. She said Sarah didn't know that she was calling, so whatever my decision, it would stay between the two of us. Now I won't lie, it broke my heart to hear all that. There was still part of me that would always love her. I mean, I really felt like she saved my life. If I had never met her, I might never have become the healthy person I was today. I told her mom that while that was really sad to hear, I just couldn't face her. Her mom said she understood. I did say to her though that I had a message for Sarah. I told her that if she really does care about me, then for me, she should eat, sleep and start prioritizing her own personal health. Her mother said that I was a good man and that she will miss me. We said our goodbyes and that was it. They never reached out after that. The first 3 months after the breakup were rough. I was depressed. I stayed inside all day. Even considered drinking again. But I resisted. After a while, people started showing up at my door and insisting I come over to their place, that it would be good for me to get out and socialize. So I did. Now these were actually Sarah's friends originally. But I had grown real close with them as well. And they were all actually very upset with Sarah for what she did. Most of them had stopped talking to her. I know that Danielle had tried to reach out, but just got nothing back in response. So she gave up. After that third month, things started to get better. I was getting out of the house more. Spending more time with friends. Was starting to smile and laugh again. I still felt like a piece of me was missing, but at least I wasn't moping about all day anymore. Now fast forward to a little over a year later. I was at the mall, which I hated by the way. I only go to the mall if I absolutely need to. I wanted a game, but didn't want to wait for it to be shipped, so instead I went to the mall to get it immediately. I use the entrances through the food court. As I am walking, I look over the sea of tables and I spot someone who looks familiar. I stop and take a hard look because I feel like I know them. Then it dawned on me, it was Sarah. I had not seen her since our breakup. And she was not looking good. She was skinnier, which was not great. She was already on the petite side as it was. She had dark circles under her eyes, her hair was a mess and she was wearing baggy stained clothes. She was just face down staring at her fried rice and picking at it with her spoon. Immediately I had two thoughts. Either she had moved on, found someone else, recently broke up, and this was her sad over that. Or she was still a mess from our breakup from over a year ago. Considering her state, I chose to believe the latter. I was starting to have conflicting feelings. Part of me just wanted to keep walking. That said, she cheated on you and betrayed your trust, you don't owe her anything. And another part said, this woman saved your life. You loved her more than you had ever loved another person. Can you just sit by and see her like that? Before I knew it, I was walking over to her table. Then I was sitting at it. Right across from her for the first time in a long time. She didn't look up right away. But after a couple seconds she finally looked up. The more her head raised, the bigger her eyes got. She was stunned, her mouth partially open, trying to find words to speak, but nothing. Until finally she said my name. I looked at her and said, "Hi Sarah, how have you been?" She still didn't know what to say. She just blurted out "I'm fine I guess, you?" I told her I was doing great, but that she didn't look like she was. I asked her if she had been this way since our breakup. She just lowered her head and nodded. I asked her what she had been doing the last year. In a quiet tone and without making eye contact, she told me that she had not been up to anything. She didn't have a job and was still living with her mom. I asked her if she was in therapy. She nodded and said that she started shortly after our breakup. So many thoughts were going through my head. I just sat looking at her, and she just sat with her head down looking away. I could tell she was uncomfortable. Finally I broke the silence and asked her when her next therapy session was. She said tomorrow. I asked her if she was allowed to bring people with her. She said she didn't know, but in a bit of a confused tone. Then she kind of looked up and asked why. I asked her if she could reach her therapist at any time. She said yes. I told her to call her therapist later and see if I can come with her tomorrow. Sarah just froze. She stammered and then asked me what I was talking about. I told her that I would come to therapy with her tomorrow. She raised her head a bit and was actually looking at me now. Face dumbstruck. She asked me why. Why would I do that? I should hate her, so why? I took a moment, then took a deep breath and told her that if there is anyone who can understand even part of what she is feeling right now, it's me. I told her that it's been over a year and that she shouldn't have been beating herself up over this for that long. That she looked unhealthy. And that I hated seeing her like this. She stood by me when I was getting over my depression. She talked to me, supported me and never abandoned me. So I figured that I could let the past be in the past, and at least repay the unpayable debt I owed her by trying to be there and support her through what she is going through right now. She just gave me the weirdest smile. Like she had forgotten how to, and this was her interpretation of what she thought it was supposed to look like. She kept repeating, "Really? Are you serious? I don't deserve this, thank you." I could see she was excited. But she was so weak, that it just looked like some mild fidgeting. I pulled out my phone, pulled up her contact and unblocked her. I told her to call her therapist and to text me later to know if I should show up tomorrow. And if so, to send me the address and other details, and that I would be there. Again, she just fidgeted around while giving me that goofy smile. I got up from my seat, turned around, took a couple steps and then faced her. I told her that if she wanted to repay me for this, then she should try and eat as much of the fried rice as she can. She said she would. I told her I had to go, but to contact me later and let me know. She didn't say anything, just continued to give me that smile. I got to the edge of the food court and turned around to look at her one more time. She was just scooping a big spoonful of the fried rice into her mouth. One right after the other. I couldn't help but giggle. Then she just got up so fast, dumped what was left of her meal, dropped off the tray and basically just ran out of there. At this point, I was audibly laughing. Later that evening I got a text from Sarah saying her therapist was a bit hesitant about it, but agreed to let me come in with her. She sent me all the details and I told her I would see her tomorrow. Almost right after Sarah's mom called me. When I saw her name pop up on my screen, I couldn't help but smile. It had been so long since we talked, and I looked forward to hearing her voice again. When I answered, the first thing I heard was crying. I asked if everything was okay. And her mom just started thanking me. In every way I could possibly think of. In between her crying, of course. I told her to stop and calm down and explain to me what's going on. She took a couple of deep breaths and I could hear her trying to compose herself. Finally, she said that she really appreciated what I had done today. That it was the first time in over a year she had seen Sarah that happy and full of energy. That the moment she came home, Sarah excitedly ran up to her and told her what had happened. That she really appreciated me finding it in my heart to not hate Sarah so much that I could stand to see her so miserable. First thing I did was state that this was not me and Sarah getting back together. I needed to make that clear. That ship had sailed. She said she already figured as much, but that it was nice to know I was just even being courteous with her at all. I told her that part of me will always care for her. And when I saw her today, that part of me was really sad to see her that way. When I was going through my worst, Sarah helped me. So why shouldn't I do the same for her? Her mom started to sniffle and cry again. I just let her get it out for a moment before she composed herself again. She told me that I really was a great man and truly the best thing that had ever happened to Sarah. And she was really sad that she hadn't gotten to see me or spend time with me over the last year. And that maybe I would join them for dinner one night. I told her let's see how therapy goes first tomorrow. Then we can figure things out from there. She said that sounded wonderful. I wished her good night and hung up the phone. The next day I had to work, but luckily got someone to cover half of my shift. That way I could be at the therapy session like I said I would. I was heading that way when I got caught in traffic. I tried to call and text Sarah, but nothing. Eventually I got there, but about 5 minutes late. I got up to the office and told the receptionist why I was there. She looked at me like I was kind of crazy. She said she would ask the therapist and would be right back. 30 seconds later she came back and told me what room to head to. I got to the office and inside was Sarah sitting on a couch. And her therapist is sitting across from her in a chair. I apologized for being late. I told Sarah I tried reaching her, but she didn't pick up. She looked at her phone and saw the missed calls and texts. She apologized, saying she barely looked at her phone these days. What? The Candy Crush wizard doesn't look at her phone anymore? Now I'm really worried. Sarah gave a weak smile and a little chuckle at this. So it was good to see she still had a bit of a sense of humor. The therapist asked me to sit down and introduced herself. She said she was shocked to find out that I not only got back in contact with Sarah, but that I offered to come to therapy with her. She asked what my intentions were. I figured this was a valid question. So I told her that seeing that Sarah has been beating herself up over this for over a year was heartbreaking. Yes, I was mad at her, but I didn't hate her. I said people can do bad things, but that does not make them bad people. And that I believe that at the end of the day, Sarah was a good person, who just did a bad thing. And that maybe this would help us both get some closure. The therapist seemed to accept this answer. She asked me to tell her a bit about myself. I told her how I was also in therapy and had BPD, what I did for work and other hobbies. I only described myself briefly. She asked me about my BPD and what it was like during our relationship. Considering it tends to put a big strain on relationships. I explained to her how Sarah had helped me get through some of my worst symptoms. Not that she cured me, but that she helped me to pull myself out of my depression. That most of my BPD traits were a thing of the past. I still had some symptoms, but for the most part I was doing much better. And I had been since the start of our relationship. The therapist started asking me questions about our relationship. How it got started, what it was like and how it ended. She wanted to hear things from my perspective. Since she had only been hearing one side of the story so far. She asked me if I had any questions I wanted to ask Sarah about in regards to her cheating. I said that there were 2 things that still bothered me. If we were so in love, then why did she cheat on me at all? And why with Josh of all people? Sarah was just quiet. Either she didn't know what to say, Or she was too scared to. The therapist stepped in and said that in the past year, one of Sarah's biggest hurdles was to understand why she cheated at all. That she knows why Josh, but she just can't explain why she did it at all. That Sarah was always disappointed in any reason she could come up with, because none of them were justified. It was one of the biggest things holding her back from getting better. So I asked her to explain why Josh then. She started speaking in a whisper, but the therapist urged her to speak louder and more clearly. That it was important that I hear what she has to say. So she sat up a bit straighter. Half-faced me, still unable to look at my face, and started to speak. She said that she was just out one day. It was maybe a week or so after our talk about marriage. She was feeling really down and sad because she couldn't stop thinking about what I said about marriage. That she kept replaying it in her head so often that my maybe was nothing more than a no in disguise. That's when she randomly ran into Josh. They said their hellos and how are yous. But Josh could tell that something was up with Sarah and asked if she was okay. She said she was fine and didn't walk to talk about it. But Josh insisted. He asked her to join him for coffee and to just vent about what was going on. And she agreed. As they sat sipping their drinks, Sarah just launched into this whole thing about how she really wants to get married one day, but she doesn't believe I ever will. How she loves me so much, but she doesn't know if she wants to stay with someone who isn't on the same page as her when it comes to this. How she felt like she wasn't good enough for me. At least not to marry. How more than likely I would just end up leaving her one day anyway. And that is when Josh tried to comfort her. He started showering her with compliments. Telling her that I was the lucky one and that in reality, she is actually the one who could do better. She said she actually snapped a bit at him for that one. Saying that I was a wonderful person and that there was no one who was too good for me. That actually warmed my heart a bit. But even after that he just kept love-bombing her. How she had been feeling depressed for a while and how because of that, his words just hit differently that day. She felt just a little bit wanted and admired. That she knew Josh was not a great person, but still couldn't help but to fall into his words. She noticed that she was getting a bit too hung up on what he was saying and realized she needed to go. He offered to walk her to her car. She declined at first, but again, he insisted. They talked all the way back to the car. Mostly him love-bombing her some more. When they got to the car, she turned around to give him a hug and thank him for his kind words. But he just leaned in and kissed her. And she didn't stop it. That in that moment she knew what she was doing was wrong, but it felt like punishment. A punishment she deserved. They went from making out next to the car, to them both in the back seat taking each other's clothes off. And that's when they had sex. Afterwards, Josh just put his clothes back on. Said that was fun, got out of the car and walked away. Leaving her in the back seat frozen and trembling. Wondering why she just did that. Feeling nothing but guilt and shame. At this point, I was mad. Not so much at Sarah. I had already processed those feelings. I didn't need to know the details to know she cheated, and that was all that mattered at the end of the day. I was mad at Josh. To take advantage of a girl, no, a friend, when they are obviously going through something. To play on her emotions like that and then to drag her down to his level. What a scumbag. Oh yeah, last I heard Stacy had divorced him, uncovered about 5 affairs that he was actively having. Used this to take him to the cleaners. Now I guess he lives in a studio apartment because that's all he can afford after alimony and child support. Stacy moved saying she and their kids just needed to be closer to her family. After Sarah was done, the therapist asked how it felt knowing the details. I said that for one, I was disappointed. Disappointed that Sarah let herself get caught up so easily in Josh's obvious manipulation. Sarah just lowered her head. I said though that if she was really feeling that depressed, I guess I can understand how she might have been swayed. She didn't really react to this. I asked her if there was anything else that was going on. Were there any other times or any other people? Sarah said no, and adamantly. I asked if there was anything that might have been contributing to the depression. That it couldn't have just been the marriage talk. She agreed and said that the depression started to set in before that talk. I asked her, was it something that I was doing, or not doing? Was I not being a good partner for her? She immediately raised her head and for the first time met my eye line. She said in a serious tone that I never did anything wrong. That while I was not perfect, that I still gave her everything she had ever wanted and that she threw it away for nothing. She broke down and started crying. Her therapist looked at me and said that this was how much guilt she has been carrying around since our breakup. That she just seems unable to move on from her mistake. She has acknowledged where she went wrong and takes responsibility for it. But it's really the reason why that has been her anchor. I went to put my arm around Sarah's shoulder but she jumped so I pulled away. Her therapist told me that Sarah has become very sensitive to physical contact and preferred to keep it to a minimum. Sarah spent most of the remaining time crying. After the meeting, we both walked outside. I asked her how she felt about that. She said it was a bit uncomfortable, but in a kind of good way. She was just happy I kept to my word and showed up. She wasn't sure if this was a trap to get back at her. I let out a small laugh and told her she sounded like me when we first met. She cracked a small smile at this. We both stood there silently for a moment before she asked what now. I said, well, now I continue to join you for these for as long as you and your therapist are okay with it. I wasn't looking at her when I said this, but I could feel her gleaming. She asked me again why I was doing this. That again, I should hate her and that she really doesn't deserve this kind of kindness from me. Still, without looking at her, I told her that I owed her more than I think she even knew. That it's been over a year since we broke up and that I was ready to move past it. That while we will never be a couple again, maybe, just maybe, we can get back to being friends again. She asked if I was being serious, and I assured her I was. I told her that out of everything that I regretted this last year, the worst was losing my best friend. That I missed her, and I think I'm at a point where I can let them back into my life. It was weird, but I swear I could hear some of the weight lift off of Sarah's shoulders. She thanked me and said she should be going. She walked maybe 5 or so feet away before I asked her what she was doing that night. She stopped, not knowing what to do. Like a broken gear, she slowly turned around. In a soft, timid tone, she said nothing. I walked over to her and asked her if she wanted to come over for dinner. Again, she was dumbstruck. She just stared. I waved my hand in front of her face and asked if she was okay. She snapped out of it and said that she appreciated it, but she probably shouldn't. I asked her why not. She didn't have a response to this. I told her that if we are going to start maybe repairing our friendship, then let's start with a nice dinner and conversation. She again said she wasn't sure. I asked her what she has to lose. As if she couldn't control it, she said, well, my mind for starters. I asked her to explain. She said that like today, she wouldn't be able to stop thinking that there is some kind of trap around the corner. That she still isn't sure if this is some kind of long planned out revenge. It was honestly the longest and most coherent set of sentences I had heard her put together in 2 days. I kind of laughed at this and told her that she really did sound like me when we first met. I assured her there was nothing nefarious going on. That I just want to bury the hatchet, and that I wanted to start that off by cooking her dinner as an olive branch. But I made it clear that this was nothing romantic. That I'm only looking to mend a friendship and that is all. She still looked skeptical, but she reluctantly agreed. I told her I still lived in the same place and to be there at 7. She turned around and walked to her car. But with a slight spring in her step. Sarah was there on time. Which was honestly a bit of a surprise since as long as we had known each other, she was always the late one. While she still looked skinny, she looked much better than she had earlier. Her hair was combed and she wasn't wearing baggy clothes. She wasn't all dressed up, but she actually put some effort into her appearance. Which I could see was already having a bit of an impact on her self-esteem. She was still being very timid and avoiding eye contact, she just also seemed a bit lighter. I don't really know how to describe it. For me, Sarah was an open book. She could never hide how she was feeling from me. Which is why I was surprised when I hadn't completely picked up on her behavior the coming weeks before the breakup. So there we were, together again back in my apartment. Not much had really changed. I got a couple new figures and Lego sets, but other than that, it was pretty much the same as the last time she had been there. She noticed the new stuff immediately though. Somehow pointing out exactly what stuff I had gotten this past year. I was honestly surprised and impressed. I asked her to come sit at the table and I would bring dinner out. She sat down and I went into the kitchen. I came out with our plates and set hers in front of her. She immediately recognized it was one of her favorite things I used to cook. I told her that I remembered that she liked that, and it was actually the only recipe I could remember how to make off the top of my head. I asked her if she wanted some wine. She questioned why I have wine if I don't drink. I said because I know she does. I know it's not in excess, but I knew she still enjoyed a small glass of wine. She told me that at one point she tried to find solace at the bottom of a bottle. But that didn't last long. Her mother threw away all the alcohol in the house and made her dry out. She hasn't touched it since then. I was both sad and happy to hear this. I told her I was proud of her. She said thank you and that water would be fine. Dinner was a bit awkward. Neither of us really knew what to say. I had moved on and was getting on with my life while she had been stuck living in the past. It felt like anything I said might just be a slap in the face for her. And I know she was just too scared to talk to me. Afraid I was going to pop out and say it was all a joke and that I hated her. Or that I would out of nowhere start yelling at her. For the record, I didn't even yell at her the night I caught her. I decided to cut the silence and asked her how she was doing. She just kind of shrugged, lifted her hands up to her shoulders and just gestured at herself. I asked her to tell me about her year. She didn't want to talk about it. She was embarrassed and I understood that, so I didn't press. I asked her how her mom was. She said that her mom has really been struggling also the last year. That she hadn't made things easy for her mom, but through it all, her mom has stayed by her side. I told her that her mom was a saint. Sarah raised her eyes to me and gave me a smile and I smiled back. Conversation got a little easier after that. She asked me about my year. I told her the first 3 months were the roughest. How I also just boarded myself up in my apartment and wallowed in misery. But eventually I got my ass up off the couch and decided that I wasn't going to let this bother me anymore. Because of everything that had happened over the last 3 years, I had become a much healthier and resilient person. And because of that, it was easier to bounce back. I couldn't read what Sarah was feeling while hearing this. Which again, weird, I always knew what she's feeling. I attribute this to a malfunction due to lack of proximity. We will recalibrate later. There was a brief pause when I was done. She said she was happy for me. That I was able to bounce back and that I was doing well. There was guilt in her voice and despair in her eyes. I didn't realize that this is how much guilt she had been carrying around. This is how bad she felt about her mistake. This is how much I meant to her. That she would turn into a shadow of the woman that I once loved in the wake of her mistakes. It was at this moment that I knew what I had to do. I had to let go of any anger or resentment that I might still hold for her. And maybe if I can truly do that, and show her that I forgive her, she can let go of some of that guilt and move forward with her life. We finished dinner. She still had a lot left on her plate, but her appetite was poor due to basically starving herself. But I was still glad she made an effort to eat as much as she could. She said it was better than she remembered. I thanked her for coming over. I know she was reluctant to come, but I was happy she decided to trust me. She gave me a nod. I asked her what she wanted to do next. It was still early and she didn't have to go home right away if she didn't want to. She agreed to stay and asked if we could sit on the porch like we used to. We would spend hours out there talking or reading or just generally doing nothing. It was our little happy place. I smiled and agreed. We went outside and sat in our old seats. I commented that no one has sat there since the last time she did. She gave me a smile. The way she was holding her head and how her hair framed her face, she reminded me of Violet from The Incredibles. Only Sarah is a dirty blonde. But we just sat out there and talked. She had really started to relax and was opening up a bit more about her year. She was still being vague, but at least letting me get a glimpse. She seemed more interested in everything I had been doing in the last year. Have I discovered any good new bands? What new movies have I seen that I liked? Any funny TV shows that I would recommend? She really seemed to only want to talk about me. I tried many times to redirect the conversation to getting a bit more info on her, but she would just dodge and roll. At least she seemed a little peppy. She was talking with a bit of a louder tone and with more inflection. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She still had trouble looking at me, but she at least raised her head a bit more. The balcony light illuminating her hazel eyes. I could see a tiny bit of the Sarah I once knew. I knew she wasn't gone. So Jack. Jack is my neighbor? He is a good guy, but he really isn't for everyone. I still don't know how we became buddies, but he is the only friend I have in the apartment complex. Now he and Sarah never really saw eye to eye in the first place. Again, not for everyone. But after Jack heard what happened, he straight up hated her. I remember having to calm him down because he seemed more pissed off than I was. So Sarah and I are sitting on the balcony talking and Jack walks by. He sees that I am with someone on the porch, but he doesn't recognize her at first. He says hello to me and introduces himself to my guest. When Sarah said, "Hey Jack," I could see his eyes start to widen and he had the most hateful look on his face. He recognized her voice instantly. I saw him starting to get worked up and I knew he was about to go off on her. So I quickly got out of my seat, ran up to Jack and told him to come and talk to me on the side. He just looked at me and asked me what the hell I was doing. I told him I know, but he just needed to come and talk to me privately. He kept trying to protest and wanted to know what she was doing here. I basically had to drag him to the side of the building. I told him to stop freaking out and just let me explain. He, in somehow the most condescending way possible, told me that I better have a damn good explanation. I snapped at him and said that I was the one that got cheated on. And I really don't have to explain myself or my actions when it comes to this matter to anyone. But I was choosing to give him an explanation. Then I asked him if he would just listen. He agreed. I told him everything. About how I saw how miserable she looked at the mall. That she was obviously still in pain over what happened. That isn't what I wanted for her, regardless of what she did to me. That I was choosing to be the better person and try to help her get on with her life. Jack was just shaking his head at all this. He raised his voice a bit and told me I didn't owe her shit. That she betrayed me and she got what she deserved. I told him that I didn't think so. That everyone should have a right to happiness. She sabotaged herself a year ago. And I just chose to be over it and wanted to help her put her life back together. Jack still wasn't accepting this. He kept shaking his head and saying no. He was about to protest again before I stopped him. I told him in a very serious tone that this was my decision and my decision alone. And he didn't have to like it, but he needed to respect it. I was the one who was hurt and that I should have a right to choose if I want to forgive her or not. He had nothing to say to this. He just backed up and said, "Fair enough, man, you want to get your heart broken again. Don't say I didn't warn you." He turned around and walked away. When I got back to the porch, Sarah asked if everything was okay. I told her it was just Jack being Jack. She said she remembered. I told her she should already know, since I knew she was listening in on our conversation. She gave a fake laugh and denied it. I looked at her and told her that I always knew she listened in on my conversations when I talked to someone around the corner. Her jaw hit the floor. She asked how long I had known. And I told her since before we started dating. She asked how I knew. I told her sometimes it was our friends seeing her head poke out from around the corner real quick. Sometimes I just heard her rub up against a bush. I told her she isn't as sneaky as she thinks she is. She just let out a nervous laugh and asked why I never said anything. I told her that I thought it was cute how she always thought she was being sneaky. At times I pulled people off to the side of the building and had fake conversations in order to throw her off my trail when I was planning a surprise. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It started small, but continued to grow. She started laughing. This wasn't one of her half laughs that she had been giving me. This was a real laugh. Again, I was starting to see the old Sarah again. Before we knew it, hours had passed by and it was late. We finally realized the time and Sarah said she should probably go. She got her stuff from inside and I wished her a good night. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and hit that subscribe button to follow cheating love stories for more amazing videos. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next one.